We are with, can I say Our Lady in Paris? Man and Bean? I remember growing up, I had a Dexter Gordon album called Our Man in Paris, original Dexter Gordon from the 50s with Sonny Clark on piano. And there's a picture of, that's when the jazz musicians used to live in Europe, and
they still live in Europe. They still live here.
But I always thought, Madame B, Deb, and you're so fortunate in a way to be in France. I'm stuck here in the U.S. As we've spoken.
Yeah,
but this is
weird, very weird, difficult times, and really, I don't want to complain about being here, but let's be clear that this shift that we're seeing is happening all over Western Europe as well.
It is.
Don't know if it would ever take the same shape as it's taken in the U.S., but in any case, we are here to talk about.
Well, we're here to talk about this is my series I invented that I'm calling Travels with the Dark, or Travels with Darkness, and I thought it would, it's time to talk about the serial killer, because it's just, I know everybody does, and you can make the case that maybe we ought not to cover it for that reason, that it's overrepresented or that it's over-discussed. But there's also a case to be made, speaking of cases, FBI cases, there's a case to be made of discussing it in a more thoughtful way, a way that you could say is nuanced, but also a way that does honor victims, if that's at all possible, victims' families, but also history. Because I see this topic as a very historical, as really a history of an era, right? If you think about travel and transportation and vehicles and cars and the 60s and 70s. So it's really one of the big stories of the 20th century, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And because there's so many, but there's a lot to discuss. And I've read some books, I really, most recently, I'll show you, I really was taken with, of course, the graphic. This is a really superb, my friend Donner, really good movie. If you've seen the movie version, it's really good.
I have seen the movie version, and I like them both, but I think the book is better.
Well, of course, the book is better, but it's really something.
Right. Yeah. No. It's yeah.
Another favorite of mine, of course, is Rest in Peace, the great Michelle McNamara, Patton Oswalt's ex-wife. This is actually almost a high art writing. This is really beautiful. This is like one of the great. Yeah. And that when she talks to the killer, you'll be, that soliloquy or monologue where she says, she'd probably hear you read it, you will come going into your house and you will.
Right.
It's just beautiful. So there is an aesthetic, creative dimension to this awfulness. And, I'm kind of late to the party, Deb, because I didn't, I'm sure you've read all this stuff ages ago, some of it. And I'm a little bit new to it. I'm just now discovering Anne Burgess, and all the Mindhunter, the people that are discussed in that great movie series, David Fincher's Mindhunter.
That was a great series. And I almost cried when I learned that it wasn't going to get renewed.
It is getting renewed.
It is getting renewed?
There's going to be a season 3 from what I heard. And David Fincher.
I didn't know that. Like the last word that we heard was that it was not getting renewed because it was just too expensive and it just wasn't making its money back. And they had, I don't want to give any spoilers away for your listeners, but, they were just starting to get into a storyline that would have been fascinating. And I think that Mindhunter is one of those shows that, although it's fictional, and of course, with a fictional work, you always have a lot of, artistic license. But I thought that Mindhunter did it in a way that was really respectful towards all of the characters involved. And, the composites that they did of, Robert Ressler, and they did a great job. I hope that's true, that they're going to renew it, because a lot of us were big fans of that show and devastated that it didn't get renewed.
I think there's some more historical or practical reasons for the renewal, because I think there's a lot of material they really were unfinished stories that they wanted to tell.
Exactly. It left on a very unfinished story.
Unfinished. I think BTK is one. You know,
That's right. That's what I'm referring to. Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen a Netflix documentary with his daughter, right? Have you watched that?
I have. She's amazing.
What do you
She's an
make of
amazing person. I think she's just an amazing woman who experienced trauma on a level that none of us can understand, because you have to remember, she's also a victim of her father in a different way. You know, she's alive, of course,
Yeah,
but imagine, having to retroactively examine every minute of your childhood to
yeah,
recognize it all as a lie. And then not just any normal lie. It's not like daddy was having an affair.
yeah.
Daddy had he had people in the basement, and he was doing all of this under cover of being a family man. And in fact, he was an extremely abusive family man. And, now it makes a lot more sense to her, I think,
Oh yeah,
through the lens of understanding who he was, how he
yeah.
was extremely controlling and abusive, even in the household, and I think just for her trying to break free of her own kind of projected ideas of who she hoped her father was and would be,
Yeah.
it's a kind of grief that none of us can understand. So I think she's amazing.
Oh, she's a hero. Yeah, she's also
Yeah.
really well in that movie. She's extremely articulate and very I really appreciated that particular documentary, and it actually made me look at things in a different way. I don't know. I don't always, maybe it's what you're talking about. I think it's having, the need of reconstructing your whole, every bit of your life, what's real, what's false,
Yeah.
who this man, your father, really was. There's another aspect to it too. As you know, I'm interested in religious history and certainly history of fundamentalist Christianity. Do you think that plays a role, or that?
It absolutely does. 100% does. Yeah. And so I have a question for you, though, before we go
Yeah.
any further.
Yeah.
You've said that, and I remember thinking, I found it a little odd that you were starting to get into serial killers and killers in general, because that's never really been your thing.
Oh.
What got you interested in this topic?
I think maybe the David Fincher series.
Really? Okay. So Mindhunter.
It was two
Like,
things. It was
okay.
watching the HBO account of Michelle McNamara and
Right.
Paul Holes. I was really impressed with Paul Holes and these sort of citizen detectives.
Yes.
And I was very wrapped up in the drama of them finding the East Area rapist. I found that a very captivating story, I have to say. So it was probably her work in particular, and the more fictional, dramatic David Fincher series. Going back a little further, I revised my opinion of the movie Zodiac. So I saw Zodiac in theaters when it came out, and I was a little underwhelmed by it. Believe it or not, such a great movie.
Wow. Okay, it's one of my favorites. Yeah.
Yeah, we're all entitled to change our opinions. I don't know why it didn't land. I don't know. I liked, of course. So what I would say is that I thought it was a good film, but I didn't see the greatness of it, so to speak, But when I rewatched it, in theaters again, another screening, at Harvard Film Archive, I think, or in Cambridge, sitting in front of it, Mark Ruffalo and I'm Not Paul Avery, Robert Downey Jr. I thought actually for the show, I almost ordered an I'm Not Paul Avery t-shirt.
That would have been good.
inside baseball. But actually, I think rewatching that movie and loving that film of Fincher's was another. So those are the couple of things that went together that thought, there's something here. This is a big topic. And that's really it. That's I guess the reason, if I had to pinpoint something. I don't know if that's fair or not, or that's interesting to anybody.
Well, I also ask because we've talked about the historical context of serial murders, and the fact that in the age of cars and mass transportation, you see a proliferation of cross state, cross country serial killers on the move. That's something that you never saw, like, before the invention of the car, for example.
Yeah, I know you. Well, hold that thought, because that's so there's what kind of I think we're going to do 2 episodes on this. So this is part 1. I've said it here so that we can relax a little bit. We don't have to shove everything in one episode. Also, I think this you're talking about that's the I see that as kind of history of technology in a weird sort of way. So history of transportation, because that's a big deal. We tend to take for granted the automobile and the airplane. You know,
absolutely,
just like the airplane in a way brought us COVID. Actually, if you want to look at it that way,
a lot of diseases, bird flu, all kinds of things.
We could say that the vehicle, the automobile, the sports car, the pickup truck, the station wagon, etc., brought us serial killers.
Right? Yeah, everything. Yeah, mass transportation.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, like cars and trucks and every kind of four-wheeled vehicle as well. You know, it's allowed movement in a way that you know. The reason that's important is that if you've got your eyes set on being a serial killer, it's a lot easier if you can go somewhere to a location where you're not connected to anybody and there's no ties can be made to you between you and the victim. It's a little harder now that we've got mass surveillance as well, though. So we could talk about how that has also changed things and the role of mass surveillance and being able to capture killers in a way that they weren't able to do so before. So, you know, we kind of
hold on. So one thing, there's 2 things about mass surveillance. One good, one bad. So the good thing, of course, is transparency. You can figure out who did what, just like with these shootings in Minneapolis. Right. The bad thing is we become overtly obsessed with public events. And we become overly emotionally attached to victims of fascism or so there's the part of transparency, but that transparency is the thing that the show Pluribus deals with. You know, the show Pluribus asks the questions: if you become like one hive mind, is that such a great thing without privacy, without secrecy? Actually, as Vince Gilligan shows us in that show, it's a nightmare. A world where we have no privacy, secrecy, secrets, where we're not individual people is a nightmare world. Is not, even though we may dream of its benefits. And that's kind of where we are now. It's like everything is captured. But of course, as you know, you can change factual video to make it AI or change. You know. So even that is not a sure thing. So that's the problem where we are now. But so I'm just saying, mass surveillance is a double edge. Is that positive?
It is. I agree. I mean, any kind of anything is a double-edged sword, really. Right. But I wanted to know what got you interested, especially because you're a 1970s historian. So are you finding now, you know, that intersection of 1970s?
So I should have mentioned. So that's the biggest. It's so much of this crime is a 70s issue.
It's when I think it's when it became, you know, in the 70s is when serial murder became kind of mainstream information. Prior to, because there have been serial killers, if you ask me, they've existed since forever. It's just that
like the 19th century and
Oh, I think they existed before that, Mitch. I really do. I think they've been around for a long time. Sometimes we called them different things, you know. I could make a very strong argument that Henry VIII was a serial killer. A serial killer born into, you know, monarch position, born into royal lineage. So he was able to use his position as total cover for his behaviors. But, you know, very strong argument. There are many serial killers who are just wife killers that killed multiple wives or partners. So I would say that, you know, if you loosely define serial killer as a man, because they're usually men, and we can talk, you know, about the Eileen Warneses and the handful of female serial killers, but I don't know of any females. That's not true. There are a few female serial killers that I think fit the category of a psychosexual killer in a way, but they tend to always be attached to a man. Sort of like Myra Hindley. You know, she was part of, you know, the Manchester Moors murders.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, she was doing it for Ian Brady, whom she was totally in love with. And for whatever reason, You could say that she was a psychosexual killer, but
Oh, okay.
only in the service of this man that she had centered herself around. So I think that, if you just loosely define let's just say psychosexual serial killers
Right.
tend to be the ones that people are most interested in, I think.
Yeah.
And I think the reason for that is, well, sex sells, that's for sure, but also because sex is something that everyone engages in, or at least mostly everyone. It's something that we are all familiar with. It's something we all do. It's something that we've all done at some point in our lives, or are still doing, or will do later. It's
Okay.
a normal part of the human experience, right? But
Right.
murder is not. And so when you have the intersection of sex and murder, and then that, I think that really freaks people out, because it's
Right.
like, oh gosh, like something that is supposed to be enjoyable and meant to be a thing that you connect over, that you enjoy a person over. Suddenly now you see that this thing can turn incredibly dark in some people. So I know that you were starting to tell me about the Anne Burgess theory, for example.
Oh yeah, yeah. She goes deep into that. I think. Do you want to do that now or cover? I mean, hold
Yeah,
on that.
yeah, like, because I don't think I've read the whole. I don't think I'm familiar with her full theory. So.
Oh well, her theory is very commonsensical. It's not that complicated, and I think there is truth in it. She centers on internal human fantasies. And she says, I'm going to call them just serial perpetrators, serial offenders, because it involves a whole, some people just rape, some people rape on the dead bodies. And some people, of course, as you know, a lot of these serial killers take parts of the body off and have sex with the body parts and all this. A lot of them did. And, anyhow, all that awfulness, for her is rooted in obsessive fantasies in these offenders that do arise early in childhood, sometimes as early as 4 or 5 years old. Fantasies of controlling a person or a female, and fantasies of murder and control of these victims. And the fantasies become so obsessive, almost like people that have interrupting thoughts, kind of almost a compulsive thing in mind, that they have to make it real. They have to do it to people in life, and that's for her model. But it does start in the fantasy life, that in turn is triggered, I guess would be the word, by sounds cliched, but unusually bad family life, of course, and
Oh yeah,
all that, but not always. So it's interesting. So that's kind of her theory. I hope I'm doing justice to it, but so for her, it's the mind. It's mind to the world.
So yeah, no, I remember that, and I think she's right, but I think also you have to take her perspective in the context of the time, her role in the growing. She was there at the very beginning when they were just kind of starting to study serial killers. They were just starting to find them. They were finding the Bundys and the Donners. So it was a kind of new discipline.
It is new, but it's also the 70s. She's a creature of the 1970s.
Yeah, she's a creature of the 1970s, and I agree with her her theory about the obsessive compulsive fantasizing.
Yeah.
And I believe that most serial killers, if not all of them, have the same kind of like an OCD component to their brains that you find in addicts. So, for example, let's say you're dealing with like a cocaine addict or a heroin addict or whatever, meth addict. You take this substance and it does something to your neurochemistry in your brain. It releases dopamines. It sets off, all these neurons firing. It makes you feel amazing for just, a few minutes. And then what ends up happening, the way that people become addicts is that they're constantly trying to chase those early highs, especially that first one, which pretty much any addict will tell you, you never get that same high as you get in those first, like, couple, the first time or the first few times that you've done a drug. So I think that it's the same kind of neurochemistry happening in any kind of compulsive behavior in general. But you'll see this in people who are compulsive shoppers or compulsive spenders or compulsive overeating. You will find the same kind of neurochemistry. But imagine now that you have that neurochemistry, that neurochemical dysfunction, and the fantasy, the desire that's attached to it is an amalgam of sex and violence.
That's right. It's
so
putting those together.
Do you remember when you and I did the Looking for Mr. Goodbar episode?
Yeah.
And we talked about the guy who did those murders.
Yes.
That murder, I would say. He just did the one. I believe he would have been a serial killer in the making. He definitely would have been a serial killer in the making.
Yeah,
and
Deb,
I think
Deb, we agree on that. You know who also agrees with that is would agree with that is Ann Burgess, Dr. Ann Burgess, because that's her theory, that she says it's never a one-off. It's always a start of something. She says it's never. She's pretty.
I think that a lot of the times these guys they're not into like regular normal sex that's for connection or pleasure. That's not their thing. No. They need the violence to get off. Right. So, I often heard people say, well, it's not sex. It's not about sex. It's really just about the violence. It's kind of about both, but the violence is the sex for them.
And the torture and seeing as you know, some of these offenders, perpetrators, they're so into the torture and awfulness, that they often rape women in front of their children. They rape women in front of their grandparents and parents if they're in the room, making sure that everybody sees it. It's just scratching up the awful. Yeah.
And it almost seems designed to be like what they're getting off on is the very depravity of it. The more depraved, the more they're into it. It's a kind of sadism. You have the
way it's actually identical to the Manson. So I would say it's similar to when Sadie and
absolutely, yeah. And they say that they were on drugs that night. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. I just think, I don't think there is any drug that you could pump into me that would make me able to do something like that. So I think that there's something really inherent in this type of person, and I agree that in almost every situation, and I would argue in all of these cases, I would challenge anybody to present me with a single psychosexual serial killer who had a normal, functioning, loving, caring childhood. I don't think it exists. I don't think that person exists. I think that what you might see it from time to time is the outward image of a normal, loving, caring family.
Like a pantomime.
Like a performance of it. And, that maybe even behind the scenes, there was no physical violence. There was no, overt abuse, but abuse and neglect come in many different forms. Forcing your child to try to overachieve all the time, that's a kind of neglect and abuse, if you ask me. There are these parents who, they're sending their kid, what do they call them nowadays? I think helicopter parenting or something like this. You've got your kid in cello lessons and also in in 5 different sports teams and, in honors classes. And this kind of pressure that comes from parents for their child to perform and overperform is a kind of narcissistic parenting, because it really isn't about what that child wants. It's really about it's what the parent wants to be able to project onto that child, so that that child can be held up as some kind of trophy of, look at what an amazing parent I am. Look at the amazing human being I raised. You see this over and over and over and over. In all kinds of abuse stories that come up later on, where it looks like, oh, this was really a good, family. Bundy always claimed that he was raised by this very loving mother. There was never any problem, no abuse. And then when you look deeper into it, there actually was, because she absolutely refused to believe that her perfect son could be anything other than perfect. And she willfully ignored clear signs that there's something wrong with my kid. It was more important for her to believe that she's the perfect mother of this perfect, loving son. So, I happen to believe that these are forms of abuse and neglect. So I don't agree that, abuse has to be some kind of overt abuse that looks obvious to everybody who's looking on. And I think that's why we're living in a world with so many messed up people, honestly. It starts with the home. And so, okay, not to get too off track, but when you have these kinds of situations, sometimes, and I think I think also with most psychosexual killers, there's a strong element of hatred of the mother.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And very often what happens is that if there is not a clear early bond between mother and son, things go horribly awry. Things can go horribly awry. I think in the most innocuous cases, you end up with a son that's maybe just not good at being a partner, not really able to like form relationships with women. And then in far most horrible cases, of course, you've got serial killers.
Oh, yeah.
And you see
that's the extreme end of it going wrong. The extreme end of it going wrong.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't have as many thoughts as you actually.
Well, you recently read the Gacey book, which I haven't read yet. Boys Enter the House.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, I haven't read that one, and as you know, I'm from Chicago, so that was one of the first cases.
You want to talk about that a little bit because
sure, I can talk about I think I've written in my bio before that as a kid growing up in Chicago during the 70s, I developed an early taste for travels with the dark. I developed.
I want to make something clear. So when I say I don't have as many thoughts as you, I want to be clear what that actually means, because I don't want to be. It isn't that I don't think about it, and it isn't that it's not interesting to me, and it isn't that if I wanted to, I think I said I think you have more sort of, actually put it bluntly, more knowledge and wisdom about some of these things, and so that's why I haven't. And I'm not really committed to a theory like the one you're presenting now. I haven't really thought. Well, I definitely know it's a family. I see it now, of course, and I hear you say, and there's no reason to disagree with that. But did you want to talk about Gacey? Because that's the 70s.
Yeah.
That's part of 1970s Chicago history.
Yeah, right? And it's not just, like I said, that one feels really close to home. So when all of that was going on, I was a kid. Wow. And Gacey was in the suburbs. He was in Des Plaines, Illinois, which is like maybe 45 minutes to an hour outside of the city, but still part of the Chicagoland suburbs. So he was a big shot. He was a guy that was kind of always, shaking hands with the mayor and, Jimmy Carter and he was very big on getting his picture taken with big shots to show that he was a big shot. He was very
hold that thought. He was part of the Democratic Party machine in Illinois, right?
Yes, he was.
Like, Rosalind Carter loves me, and people would come, when police would come to his house investigating, even before they started smelling the stench of the bodies. Yeah, he's going on and on about how great Rosalind Carter was and how he's, all this stuff,
And he was very, very self-aggrandizing. That is, I think, a classic grandiose narcissist. Which many serial killers are not grandiose. They're actually they're very soft-spoken and hoping to kind of fly under the radar. But Gacey is in the kind of same category with like a BTK or a Ted Bundy. Whereas like Dahmer was not grandiose. Dahmer
was more the loner or more the shy.
Dahmer was the mousy loner. So just goes to show you lots of different personality styles can become serial murderers. So so Gacey, as all of this was happening, it was also, Bundy was also very much in the headlines at the time. And, there was
True.
still a lot of Manson family hangover,
Oh yeah.
Richard Ramirez,
Oh yeah.
and it wasn't, in Chicago, Gacey was the one that got the big front page headlines.
Yeah.
The Bundys and the Dahmers, they were more like in the later pages of the newspaper, the Chicago Tribune or the Sun-Times or whatever. So Gacey is the one that like really put a stain on Chicago and the Chicagoland suburbs. And, I think it threw a lot of people for a loop because you're looking at this guy who was like, well, he was like this upstanding citizen. He had a contracting company. He schmoozed with Jane Byrne, the mayor at the time,
Oh yeah.
with the Carters. And, that I think, as a kid growing up with a lot of dark news, I mean, we were kids at the same time. It was just a lot of dark news in the 70s.
Do you think that Gacey's a lot like Radner, the BTK? Because Radner was a prominent.
Yeah.
Wasn't Radner prominent in the church? Certainly in the
personality-wise, absolutely, both grandiose narcissists, both of them. Both of them sadists, both of them incredibly depraved. They have a lot of similar personality structure, but obviously
of course,
different.
The elephant in the room with Gacey is what we would say now queer LGBTQ plus gay liberation. Yeah.
That's another thing that comes into his story.
Absolutely.
Is that a hidden lifelong desire. He was a gay man, basically. That was his true like sexual orientation, sexual and romantic orientation. He was attracted to men.
Yeah.
But he lived his life as this heterosexual. And again, it all kind of plays into this like pressure of a heteronormative culture and society. You have to wonder, there are parts of me that wonder, like, had he just been able to be himself, would he have turned out this way? Who knows? Maybe yes, maybe no.
I mean, I do think that he has such a I'm going to use the word deviant. So he deviates from all sexuality, or ethical sexuality, and he does like forcing the boys. There is that love of violence and forcing.
Yeah, he's a sadist.
Many of these boys, it's non-consensual. They're not gay. Some are gay.
They're not gay at all.
No, but some are. He mixed. So his targets were a mixture of gay male hustlers who were very sophisticated and worldly, street smart, with regular straight boy next doors. He targeted both groups of males.
He targeted whoever he was attracted to. I think the more important thing there is he targeted who he was attracted to, and largely who he knew that in reality he could never attract. So they would never be attracted to him.
I see.
And so he also had a very pedophilic bent to him as well, because he was attracted to very, very young boys some of the time. There was a whole spectrum of ages, but at the same time, you could say that he definitely crossed into being a pedophile. So
it's addition too. Yeah, he was certainly a pedophile. Yeah, I did. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to omit that. I was just trying to grasp. I just, when I think about Gacey, I think about, of course, gay history and that, because that period and him, being with all these males, and this book, the point of view of the Boys Under the House is very much how he wormed his way in the gay community. Wormed as much as
I'll have to read that. I haven't read it yet.
Wormed his way in the gay community until the gay bouncers of the gay clubs kicked him out. Right, they banned him and said, right, because isn't he putting drugs and drinks and doing some of that? Oh, I'm sorry, that's Dahmer. I'm confusing two different. It was Dahmer that was banned. Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, no, Dahmer definitely cruised in gay clubs where the clientele is predominantly Black and Hispanic, where he stood out. And I think that, he probably deep down believed that if he tried to go to like regular gay clubs that were predominantly white, let's say, he probably wouldn't have done as well, because even though he was good looking, he was so socially awkward. And so he had such an off-putting personality that he understood that in a white gay club, he couldn't have pulled the way he could in a Black and Hispanic club where he stood out as something exotic. So I think that's why he eventually started leaning more towards, Black and brown victims, because he could go into these clubs and be, this kind of unicorn that it's like, oh, what is he doing? And he was good looking, like we can
you're right.
say objectively, Dahmer when he was young was a good looking man.
And that along with these other senses of being introverted more, he's the opposite of Gacey,
Right, exactly. So he goes into these clubs and into these neighborhoods where he doesn't have to be the extrovert. He doesn't have to be the one making the first move. They're coming up to him and they're kind of swarming him. And then all he has to do is offer drinks and, you want to come over to my place. And, these people, these men, they're calculating, they know what they're doing. And it's all very planned. And like you said, it's this like Ann Burgess was saying, it's a compulsion.
Yeah.
And it does get to a point where absolutely nothing else will scratch that itch. And then what happens is they have to keep getting more and more extreme, which is where you get into now, like going, so Gacey, for example, I think that, keeping the body, you can tell me if I'm wrong about this because you've read the book and I haven't. I believe that putting the bodies under the floorboards serve two purposes. It hides the body, but also he likes having them there. He likes knowing that they're there. It just gives him a boost every day, walking around his floors, knowing that below is this beautiful boy whose life he took. He's getting off on that too. So they're getting they're getting different kinds of like dopamine hits.
So are you asking me which is?
I'm asking you, like, because you read the book and I haven't.
I don't need it. So I have a very strong opinion. So I don't think it's to avoid detection at all.
Okay.
So I mean, yeah, I guess it is to avoid detection, but I think it's pride. I think it's I think it's what you're saying. It's like they're his trophies, and it's almost spiritual and metaphysical. I hate to. Again, on some of these serial killers, they have almost a, I don't know how else to put it. It's almost a religious thing. It's like
I agree. Yeah. No, I get exactly what you're saying. saying.
Also, pride is just bizarre, like almost like he's a king from a bygone ancient religion. And these are his male trophies of these can have. Yeah. So I think it's much sicker. It's just not such a.
I think you're absolutely right.
It's not to hide bodies.
I think that hiding bodies was part of it. Like, so I can tell you, like, in that period of Chicagoland history, there was still a lot of very undeveloped land. So there were a lot of forest preserves, and there was a lot of, there were a lot of like just big parks and stuff. He could have buried them somewhere else. He could have buried them on one of his construction sites. But I think with this mentality, with somebody like a Gacey and the way he's wired, control is huge for this guy. So having those bodies there also allows him to kind of like keep an eye on them. He must have been incredibly shocked when the law caught up to him, because I believe that he probably thought that he had everything perfectly under control.
Yeah.
I think he had an illusion of having everything under control in his life, and that he would be able to just keep doing what he was doing till the end of days. But you have to wonder, like, what they're thinking when they're burying the bodies under the floorboards. Like, does it not occur to him? Like, I always wonder, like, did it never occur to him that the house could get sold at some point? Or what if there's a fire? They're not thinking that far ahead, are they? They're just thinking in the moment.
I don't think it's that they're not thinking. It's not so again, I go back to this more supernatural, for lack of a better word. It's not that I think there's a supernatural dimension. I'm just saying it's a religious. It's like, so it's a weird bonding of these male corpses they think that they think that there's powers. He probably thought that maybe, so it's a combination of his overweening pride of like, I did this, I accomplished this great crime, and it's also, there's a romantic dimension of like, in the eternal, united eternal with the love of these boys. It's really that kind of stuff. It's the romantic, religious, it's that. And when they're in that, that's the mindset. The last thing on his mind again is detection and planning for the future, and he couldn't give a shit about houses being sold. That's a mindset that he's not, as strange as it sounds, he's not in that.
It's crazy, because like, to me, those are the things that blow my mind. It's like, didn't it occur to him that, like, there could be some kind of a flood or a house fire or something where you're going to get caught like immediately. Yeah, so
he's getting off on the memory of what he did with these male.
Absolutely, and that they all do, and I think that when you're talking about them, think about Gacey thinking that it's a very romantic and spiritual thing in a way. Now, if you look at Dahmer actually had like schematics for a basically like a ritualistic kind of setup in the home. He had sketches that were ridiculous, like they looked like child scribbles, but he actually had like an altar, and how he was going to design this altar with bones and skulls and of all of the victims. And for somebody like Dahmer, just having those bodies there helped him to feel less lonely. He, in his mind, like you said, for some of them, there is this kind of romantic sexual component that lingers on just by having the bodies, the corpses or the body parts there, or the bones. There's no way to talk about this topic without getting a little gruesome. I know this sounds gruesome, but that's why there is kind of sexual activity that happens with the remains. I
mentioned in the outset of our episode, I said they do have sex with parts of bodies, and sex with forcible fellatio on heads, on dismembered heads of women, and all this kind of stuff. I do agree it's all of a piece. No pun intended, maybe. It's all I know. I mean, it's all part of this weird, like a weird mysticism. I mean, it's a false. It's in a way. It's completely evil and false and bankrupt and dubious. In other words, I'm not saying that it's a real belief, but it is in their minds. It's just.
It is in their minds, and you have to wonder, like, how they get to that point. Like, how does it get that bad? And again, you have to go back to the childhood.
Yeah.
Like you look at a Dahmer, for example, that was an extremely dysfunctional household. He grew up surrounded by just constant fighting, and like his parents hated one another, and they openly hated one another. You could say they violently hated each other. And, they were kind of stuck with each other in some ways, and I think that Dahmer had this not only no bond with either parent, but a complete dereliction of duty by both of them. I remember seeing them later in interviews. If you saw their interviews with the parents, after Dahmer was caught, you kind of like, they seemed like nice people. His father seemed like a lovely man. But then when you go back and you realize what that childhood really was, you recognize that this was a kid who had a lot of like very he was an odd kid from the beginning. There was clearly some kind of neurodivergence there, clearly. Have
you read Lionel Dahmer's book, A Father's Story?
I haven't read that one.
I have. I read it when it came out.
Okay.
In the 90s. So maybe I'm not entirely. So I say I wasn't into true crime in the 90s, but the only reason why I read Lionel Dahmer's book is that it was John Waters' favorite book. I thought, John Waters.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, filmmaker John Waters. But yeah, I read that, but it was so long ago. It was just strange. It's like an art book, like an art memoir book, A Father's Tale, or whatever it's called.
That's his. The problem with getting his father's story is that That's what he
unreliable.
remembers. Who knows if it's, who knows if he's remembering correctly. I would rather rely on third party,
Oh yeah,
totally researched
of course.
resources. I really think that there was clearly, a kind that Dahmer had some kind of a neurodivergent condition
Sure.
that was unaddressed and unnoticed, unaddressed. His father possibly had a similar condition, and then none of it gets addressed. And as a result, he's just kind of left to his own devices. In some way, Dahmer had to raise himself, and you can see he didn't do a good job.
Yeah.
If, for example, if somebody
his own devices are stuff he was doing in the cabin and the animal part and all that, and
the thing is, you're always going to have people who are interested in dead things, like taxidermy, or surgery, or cutting into bodies, surgeons. And that's the thing. If you figure out that that's something that you are into doing, the best thing you can do, if you have a kid that's like that, help him or her channel that into some kind of a career or life path that's not illegal. I mean, there's something to be said for Dexter, the show Dexter, because that's the whole premise, is that the father recognizes that something misfired in his kid's brain when his kid witnessed a murder, and he recognizes that my kid is into killing things, and I'm going to have to give my kid a code of operation moving forward so that at least when he does kill, he's killing the right kinds of people.
Right.
It sounds idiotic, but you're not going to, there's always going to be somebody born that's just kind of wired this certain way, or something happens and they become that way. And then you just have to find but people, that's the thing. Parents never want to believe there's anything wrong with their child. That's a huge part of the problem here. And I can say that as, having worked as an educator for many years, I can tell you that one of the hardest things in the world is when you are a third party recognizing some kind of anomalous behavior in a child, and you're thinking it's the time to raise the alarm bells is now. The child is not, he's not assimilating into social, normal, healthy social patterns. He's withdrawn. He's, the first thing you want to do is talk to the kid and find out what's going on. Is anything going on at home? And a lot of the time, kids, especially if they're in an abusive situation, they know not to say anything. So they don't. And so you never really get to the bottom of why there's some kind of, anomalous behavior. But that's where it begins. It begins in childhood. And so, you're not supposed to blame mothers. You're not supposed to blame the parents. But sometimes, that's where the blame begins. And often it can be multi-generational.
Right. Yeah. You want to talk more about that multi-generational dimension in one of these cases? I don't know.
Well, I think, I think I've talked to you before about this book by M. Scott Peck, who was I
love this. Yeah. People of the Lie.
People of the Lie. And his thesis for this body of work is that, and he used the word evil because he was a Christian psychologist. So he did, this book is, was approached from a perspective of a Christian who believes in Christ and also in Satan. So, most of the book is not written that way. He does touch on it mostly he takes a psychological approach, but he does use the word evil, which you don't find this word being used in it's not a clinical term, but he really made a point.
I certainly use it. And,
I use it.
I consider myself, for lack of a better phrase, a progressive Christian. So I don't have a problem.
Yeah, I am not a Christian. I am an atheist, but what struck me about this book is that even though I'm an atheist, and I have been probably since about second grade, his book struck a chord with me because I agreed with him about the concept of evil. I don't, we can apply a lot of clinical terms, to this word, but I think sometimes this is the word that you just really need. So there's I
agree with that, but also, hold on, I thought it's just such a good book. It's
a great book.
I have a first edition.
Great and underrated book, and what he's talking about are people that are born into multi-generational family systems that are just, for all intents and purposes, they're evil. So, for example, he tells a story in the book about a young man who is in therapy. He's depressed. He's, suicidal. What happened, the backstory is that his brother had killed himself using a shotgun. Somehow the parents blamed him for why his brother was able to do this. And, they were both kids. And the parents, it was his birthday or something, and they're like, oh, here's your gift. He unwraps it, and it's the gun that his brother killed himself with. I mean, that's evil. Like, that is an evil thing to do, and that's the kind of family he was in. And Peck goes on to describe the generations that came before. Like, this kind of evil doesn't come from nowhere. It gets passed on from one generation to another. And so, I can say that you can see this in a certain American president's family. What we're looking at right now is the culmination of generations of evil reproducing.
In the Trump family.
Oh yeah, the whole Trump family is just it's just abuse perpetuating abuse. Even if you look at Trump's childhood,
would you say over 100 years, right? Hundreds of,
at least 100 years, and probably more than that. And that's the thing. There was a time in history where this kind of abuse was kind of just normal parenting. It was just a normal parenting style in some ways, like an authoritarian parenting style. But in cases when you find something a bit odd about your kid, where your kid's just not performing as they should at a certain age, or they're not assimilating socially, you've got to figure out what's really going on there. A good parent will. But then if you have a child like this who's born into some kind of a dysfunctional family system, a lot of the time that just gets overlooked or dismissed, and never examined further, or just, it's not happening.
Well, Peck is something of an optimist because he thinks evil can be healed. That's the
he doesn't think all evil can be healed. If you read that book really closely, he's really saying that the only thing you can do if you're born in a family system like this, you either, if you can recognize it in yourself, recognize it in your own family, you have to get as much distance as possible.
You have to extricate yourself, basically.
You have to extricate yourself and constantly make yourself aware if you start to feel like you're behaving in a similar way. Well, anyway, so getting back to the topic of serial killers, you find this. I cannot think of one, not one, that I have read about or that I've watched a documentary about that comes from a good, caring, loving family where they were raised with loving care. I can't think of a single one. Can you?
I'm at the point where I don't even want to play that game, meaning that I don't even want to consider that as a possibility, because
I don't think it's a possibility.
I guess I'm so committed to what you're saying. I don't think it exists. And Lionel Dahmer is a pretty fucked up man. Was a pretty fucked up man in many respects, right? I mean, I hate to put it that way about him, but I'm not saying he's but that whole, again, he and his wife had both great problems. Yeah,
they both had terrible health.
There's no case. Yeah, I think so. I would go so far as to say it's a law of serial killers that there's something wrong with the families. Yeah, I agree with that.
There is something always wrong with the family system. And then even in cases where, so going back to Manson, Manson's not a serial killer per se, but you could argue in a sense that he is by proxy.
That's right.
You could say that, yeah?
Yeah.
I think that's why he kind of gets lumped in with, the kind of pantheon of serial murder, because even though he didn't maybe hold the knife himself, he did it through other people. So, and his motives were twisted. He's not just killing, he's not like a mobster. Like mobsters kill lots of people. How come we don't call mobsters serial killers? They kill lots of people, but we don't call them serial killers.
Right.
Because to be kind of branded a serial killer, there's only a handful of motives that are acceptable, and they usually have to be some kind of internal motive that doesn't really have to do with financial gain or revenge.
It's not a job. In other words, they're not a contract killer. Yeah.
So that's why, like I say, there have been serial killers going way, way, way back.
The beginning of time.
Sure, and I don't remember her name, but there was a very prolific female serial killer. She gets lumped in as a serial killer who ran a boarding house.
Right.
And she took in men who were down on their luck.
Oh,
men who were out of work, men who were homeless. She took them in and fed them and gave them room and board.
Yeah.
And she ended up killing a whole bunch of them and burying them in the garden and continuing to collect their Social Security checks or, so but the thing is, the motive there is clearly financial gain. Or is it?
Yeah.
You have to wonder, like, on the surface, and I think the reason that she gets lumped in with everybody else is that, on the surface, it looks like she just did it for financial gain. But I have to wonder what the other underlying motives might have been. Because that's a lot of work to actually think about, like killing someone and then digging a hole in the garden, burying the body there, covering. That is a lot of work. I mean, seriously, Mitch, I've got a little balcony garden, and there are some days I'm just absolutely wiped out, just like removing like dirt from one pot to repot an herb plant. So I'm trying to imagine, like, holy crap.
I guess what you're saying is that there's a lot of motivation there in this person to
but could part of her motivation also have been misandry? Because because misogyny is definitely a highly motivating factor when you have a male serial killer and predominantly female victims.
That's right.
So there's misogyny there. So in her case, all of the victims are men. Is there misandry involved?
Well, I believe Lee Warnes is a misandrist in the way that Ted Bundy is a misogynist.
I agree. Okay, so going like now, Eileen Wuornos, I have always had I've been conflicted about her inclusion in the category of serial killers because now maybe this is me, maybe this is like my former feminist kind of radical feminist coming out, but if you look at her psychology, she was so, oh God, I'm going to come across like an Eileen Wuornos apologist. And I don't mean to be, because she, what she did was also evil.
Well,
and hurt a lot of families, but
it is complicated.
Yeah, it's more complicated. It's like it's easier to look at a Bundy and a Dahmer and a BTK.
Well, they're clear misogynists, but so here's hold that thought. So I know where you're going with this. So am I conflicted? Well, what are the facts of the case? Okay, so for me, it's a simple case of, is every crime of Lee Wuornos connected to bad Johns or abusive Johns in her career as a sex worker? And if the answer is yes, that's when I don't know what you were going to say, but I don't know if that's.
I don't believe that her like the guys that she picked up and murdered.
Mm-hmm.
I don't happen to believe that all of them, if any, were in the act of trying to harm her. I think that they were mostly hiring her for a specific transaction.
Right.
But I do think that there had been, because all sex workers at some point are going to experience some kind of male violence where you're either you're assaulted or possibly strangled. I think that what she was basically doing is projecting all of the hatred she had towards those men onto these guys. And also, I think that just in general, she just had a lot of hatred and rage and anger towards the world in general. And, I think she is.
I guess what I'm saying is that you could say that work itself.
Yeah.
So again, radical feminist explanation is it's sex work itself and what it did to her. Now, I'm not going to weigh in on, but that's certainly a possibility. But this is an interesting question. So can it be both? So could it be the case that it's rational misandry, if you want to take that? So the radical feminist, so it's a rational form of misandry.
I do think that there is. I think that there is misandry involved. But I don't think
I'm calling it rational misandry.
I think it was rational to her, and that's the thing. And I think also that case is complicated by the fact that her victims were men who were seeking the services of a sex worker, and most of the women doing that kind of work would rather not. Many of the women doing this kind of work are either trafficked, so they're literally slaves, or they're forced into it through economic circumstances. They're forced into it because they don't have any other options. And then there are some women, of course, that are doing it because they're supporting a drug habit, but the drug habit started because they were born into misery. It's just like a very cyclical and multi-factored connection of just terrible things. But I don't know if I agree that she belongs in a category with despite what she did, I don't know that she belongs in a category with like Richard Ramirez, for example. I don't think you put her in a category with him. So we've talked a lot about the biggies like Dahmer and Gacey and Bundy. So how about we talk about like some of the lesser discussed ones, because like Zodiac gets talked about a lot, but for example, like the Boston Strangler, I think we forget like there's so many of them. I went to there's actually a traveling serial killer exhibition that's going around the world currently. I don't recommend it. It was here in Paris. I did go. I thought it was really overpriced, for one thing, and most of the exhibition was just blown up pages from basically books where you're just kind of reading information about these killers. So I didn't think it was really worth the price. I hoped to learn something a little more interesting or newer. The artifacts seem to be items that were owned by whoever was putting on the exhibition, which I think that the exhibition has been put on by a guy named Nicolas Clos, who is a known convicted French cannibal killer, who's now walking freely, even has a YouTube channel.
This is all.
Yes, I think he was behind this traveling serial killer exhibition, which was it was marketed as being artifacts. So there weren't many artifacts other than pencils and typewriters that they used while they were in prison after they got caught. It was stuff like that. And a few like reconstructions of crime scenes, which is not exactly what I want to like. I'm not really interested in that.
Deb, I want to make a request. So I think this is, again, a big topic. I think that we should do a part 2. And in this part 2, we focus on Rodney, Alcala, maybe, or some of these. Some of these cases and Ramirez, because there's so much to say about them. So this is part one of the serial killer in their eras. And I want to thank you for your, again, as always, the intelligence of the conversation and your wisdom. And it's a difficult question, some of these, issues of what is evil or not, how to talk about Lee Warnes, who can be, Lee Warnes, of course, could be a hero, right? I could see Lee Warnes being a hero to many ex-trafficked women, possibly, or.
And she is.
Oh, she is? Yeah, I didn't know. I mean, just guessing. So that makes it complicated. So clearly she's different than a Ramirez or a Ted Bundy, who we would say is flat out evil. But of course, these definitions are always, they're matters of debate. But I can agree with Dr. Ann Burgess that, there is a thing here in the mind compulsively making these sick fantasies real and making them into real life. That part we can agree is true, and that does happen. So how do you feel about a part 2? Are you?
Yeah, sure. Let's do a part 2.
Part 2, and thank you for your time and generosity, and be safe there in Paris.
You too, Mitch. Next time.